Question. Please give us an understanding of the I Am Presence, what it can do and cannot do, and what is the proper way to relate to it and become it. Some of us developed an erroneous view of the presence, given the more limited level of consciousness we had when we started on the path. Well, I won't say some of us, I would say all of us developed an erroneous view of the presence because we had to start somewhere. I first heard about the concept of an I Am Presence in the early 1980s. That's a long time ago, and given my growth, it seems like ages ago. I mean, lifetimes ago. But I heard about it in an organization called the Summit Lighthouse, and they also recommended a book from a previous organization called the I Am Movement. And the I Am Movement was big in the 1930s in America, and they actually have a book called The Magic Presence, which I read many years ago, and I found it very helpful at the time. But if you take the title, The Magic Presence, it sounds a little bit like magical thinking, right? And that was really what was sort of the underlying view that was in the book, that the I Am Presence almost has magical abilities. It's like this, almost like a godlike figure. It is your higher self, you are out of the higher self, but it's almost like it can answer all your questions, answer your prayers, intercede for you. So it is a little bit, or it was a little bit like the wish-fulfilling God. And of course, we have been indoctrinated with this view of the wish-fulfilling God for centuries, if not thousands of years. You know, the Old Testament God, even many Christians have this view that God can miraculously intercede for us. And in the Summit Lighthouse, they had somewhat similar view, that the I Am Presence was like this godlike figure. I remember I had a good friend in the Summit Lighthouse who would always say, "Mighty I Am Presence, help me do this." And many people would do it. I would also call to my I Am Presence in many ways. And I think that's fine, you know, that's where we have to start out. It's just the starting point. However, when we grow on the path, we are, of course, meant to grow to higher and higher levels of awareness. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the spiritual path, what is the real goal of the spiritual path? It is really a shift in your mind, in how you see yourself. Now, I have talked about how we start on Earth at the 48th level of consciousness. If we go below it, we go into separation, which means we lose our connection to our I Am Presence. But at the 48th level, we have some sense we are connected to something. We don't have the concept of an I Am Presence. But then we can find, and the Ascended Master teaching talks about the I Am Presence, and we can develop a sense that we are connected to this being up there, that we can receive some help, vision, directions from. And that's the natural next step. So gradually we expand on that sense of connection, get more and more connected to the I Am Presence. But what's the end goal of this? If you keep expanding your sense of connection, what's going to happen eventually? What does it mean to be less connected at the 48th level and more connected as you go higher? One way to look at it is that when we start the path, we see the I Am Presence as up there. There's a big gap. The I Am movement had what is called the chart of the presence, and there was this figure up there which has colored, rainbow-colored rings around it. That was your causal body, and then down below was you. The Summit Lighthouse had a similar chart, but in between was something called the Christ Self, which is your mediator between you and your I Am Presence. But still, both of these charts, they depicted a physical distance. You know, you could also say a distance in vibration, but the I Am Presence is up there. And you are connected to something over a distance, right? It's like you're talking on the telephone to somebody who is far away, and you're always talking loud because you think they are so far away. So you're connected over a distance. But the goal of the spiritual path is to decrease the sense of distance until you no longer see yourself as connected to some remote being, but you experience yourself as one with the presence or as the presence. That's the goal. You decrease the distance until there's no distance, meaning oneness. You are the presence. And as I've explained in several of my videos, the core of our being is the conscious you, which is an extension of the I am presence. That's just one way to explain it, because the I am presence in its totality can't take embodiment in an unascended sphere. So it sends an extension of itself that can go into embodiment and create these four lower bodies, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical. Well, we take on the physical, but anyway. So that's the whole dynamic there between the conscious you and the I am presence. The conscious you starts at the 48th level, seeing itself as connected to something, but gradually we expand it, and when we reach these higher levels of awareness that we can call personal Christhood or the Buddhic consciousness, we shift. So we overcome the sense of distance, start seeing ourselves as one with the presence. So now we have to realize that in order to get to these higher levels, in order to get to the higher levels of the path, we have to let go of these images that we first had when we heard about the I am presence. That the I am presence is this God-like figure way up there. And it's a delicate process, because in a way we can become attached to it. I mean, I remember from myself that, it's like the most subtle, I think, aspect of the path really is that we start out the path, and in a way we are happy with a traditional view of the remote God up there in the sky. I remember when I first heard about Ascended Masters, a part of me really felt this deep love for the Masters, this deep longing to interact with the Masters. But another part of me wanted to keep them at a distance so I could hide from them. So it was this, I call it the God on demand. Whenever you need God, yeah, God, come here and intercede in my life. Oh, now I don't need you anymore. Leave me alone. So don't watch what I'm doing. I want to be able to do whatever I want to do, even some things I know you don't want to see, and you shouldn't look at it. So that's the kind of, little bit schizophrenic view we have, and that most religious people have, because you look at most religious people, you look at most Christians, they think Jesus is going to come and save them when they die, but until then he should just leave them alone and they can do whatever they want. And it's a little bit the same here. We want the intercession from the Ascended Masters when we think we need it, and the rest of the time we just sort of want to be left alone so we can do whatever we think we need to do. And the explanation of this is, of course, that the conscious you has a longing towards oneness with the I am presence and oneness with the Ascended Masters. But the ego, all of these separate selves, subconscious selves that we have, they don't. In fact, they don't want the conscious you to be more and more connected, because they're going to die. And so in order to survive, they want to keep the conscious you trapped. And that's why we have this schizophrenic view where, in a sense, we are saying, oh yeah, it's nice that I know I have an I am presence up there who can do something for me when I need it. But it's also nice to know it's up there, so it's not going to bother me in my daily life, and maybe it isn't even going to see what I'm doing. So we switch back and forth between the conscious you longing and the outer selves basically longing to get away from the presence. So we have to gradually become aware of this. And we have to come to a point where we consciously see this dynamic. Because this is a dynamic, I never found any spiritual teaching that really talks about this. At least not in a way I could grasp. But it is the central dynamic on the path. And it took me many years to become aware of it, but once I became aware of it, it became so much easier to see, This is just a separate self. And I really am longing for oneness. I really do want to get closer to oneness. And that means you can much more easily look at these images you had of the spiritual path, of yourself, of the I Am Presence, and say, well, this is what I could grasp at the time. And if I'm attached to a particular view that I had in the past, it's a separate self that's attached to it. And it's not really that a separate self is attached to it. It tries to make me attached so I don't question it. Because if I don't question it, I can't go beyond it, and then the separate self can survive. And this is a dynamic that I've seen many, many spiritual people not grasp. I think back at the Summit Lighthouse, with thousands of members of the Summit Lighthouse, very, very sincere spiritual students that were willing to make an enormous effort, an enormous sacrifice, change their lives, give all these decrees. Many of them moved to Montana to be near the headquarters and be part of creating the spiritual community. Really sincere, well-meaning people. But many of them became trapped in a certain view of how they were, how they should be as spiritual students. And especially they were trapped in one thing. That is, it was said in the summit, we have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet. This meant the teaching was infallible, there was nothing beyond it. But see, the teachings in the Summit Lighthouse were given, first of all, for a certain level of consciousness, because people had to be able to grasp it. But they were also given in the Piscean age. And so the Ascended Masters set a certain level. These are the kind of teachings we can give in a summit. They gave some hints that there was something beyond. If you really pay attention, there was something beyond. They were saying this. But most people didn't pay attention. They were fixed on this. We have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet. That must mean I'm one of the most spiritually advanced students on the planet, and I don't need anything else. There was also said, there was another thing, you have everything you need to qualify for your ascension. And that particular statement is a test. Because if you think you have everything you need in an outer teaching, you are still in this magical thinking that the outer teaching can qualify you for entry into heaven. It's just like the fundamentalist Christians that say, if I declare Jesus to be my Lord and Savior, I'm guaranteed to go to heaven. There's no outer teaching that can guarantee your ascension. You can use the outer teaching, but using it means you transcend the teaching and you transcend the level of consciousness which the teaching was given. So you connect to the Ascended Masters and then they give you intuitively inside things. So I'm not saying you couldn't take the teachings of the Summit Lighthouse and by transcending them and making contact with the Masters, you could qualify for your ascension. But it wasn't the outer teaching in itself. And so that's why if you become attached to a particular teaching about the I Am Presence, for example, the I Am Presence is up there, you're not going to go beyond a certain level of connection. You get to a certain point where you're still thinking you have to connect to this remote being. And you have some sense of connection. This is the real subtle thing to get. You have some sense of connection, right? Because at the lower levels, you need to have that encouragement. You feel your I Am Presence is doing something for you. It is giving you help. I remember this with myself. I had probably a decade or so, I felt I was increasing my connection. I was getting help from my I Am Presence. But then it faded away. I didn't feel it anymore. I felt like Jesus hanging on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? For 10, 15 years, I've been trying to build my connection to my I Am Presence. And now it was like it disappeared. And I have known many other people in the Summit Lighthouse who had the same experience. And why is that? Because at the lower levels, as I said, we need the encouragement to grow. So we get some sense of connection, or at least we interpret it that way, that we are getting help from the presence. But if the presence continued to give us that direction and help, what would it do? It would solidify the image of the remote being in the sky. And that means we would never get to the higher levels of connection leading to oneness. We would simply stop. And that's why after a certain time on the path, when we are ready to step up, the I Am Presence must withdraw. It must leave us in a vacuum until we realize that it's necessary to let go of this old image of the remote presence up there. And that's a tough one if you have, especially if you have these separate selves that want to make you feel that you are the highest spiritual student, among the highest spiritual students on the planet, and you have the ultimate teaching. This becomes a catch-22. You can't give up this sense of being special, so you can't look for a higher teaching. Or maybe you have developed this idea that the teachings of the Summit Lighthouse, for example, or the teachings of whatever guru you have followed, that they are the ultimate teaching, they are infallible. And if there's anything beyond that, means they were not the ultimate, they were not infallible. But it's not a matter of being infallible or not. There was nothing wrong with the teachings given in the I Am movement or the Summit Lighthouse about the I Am presence. But they were given for a certain level of consciousness. And in order to get beyond it, you just have to see this and you have to reach for a higher teaching. And then, as the masters say, when the student is ready, the master appears. You just have to trust the path, that when you are ready for higher teaching, it will come to you in one way or another. And this is what happened to me. I mean, this is literally what happened to me. When I started questioning my view of the I Am presence, I got intuitively, and I also got it from in outer ways, from books and stuff. I found these other teachings that helped me just shift the way I looked at it. And it is, in a way, a schizophrenic process, because we have to function in the world. We have to have a certain sense of identity. Mental constructions in our mind for how we do things. We have feelings. And the I Am presence, we are inside of it. The conscious you is inside of this outer personality, but the I Am presence is not. The I Am presence is really unaffected by it. You know, you can have this, say you have this person who has this need to feel that he or she is very special, is the most advanced spiritual students on the planet. Well, this comes from a separate self. It doesn't come from the I Am presence. The I Am presence doesn't look at itself that way, because the I Am presence is aware of the spiritual realm, as aware that it's out of the Christ mind, out of the ascended masters, is one with everybody. And in oneness, there's no high or low, there's no comparisons. So the I Am presence isn't affected by these dualistic views. I'm the most advanced spiritual student on the planet. You know, it is not affected by it at all. And that means if our outer minds are so focused on this, we can't really tune into the presence. And the other thing is that when we get to the higher levels, it's not a matter of tuning into the presence in the sense that we tune in over this distance. It's a matter of shifting our sense of identity and realizing there is no distance. And I came to that, I can't remember, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago or something like that, where I started realizing that it was no longer meaningful for me to look at the presence as being up there, remote from me. I needed to shift so that I first started realizing that the presence is all around me. Because even though there is a vibrational difference between the physical world and the spiritual physical world exists inside the spiritual realm. It's just, the spiritual realm is not up there in heaven. This is one of these images that we need to overcome, that has been projected, you know, for so long by the fallen beings, essentially, that God is up there in this remote heaven. But the spiritual realm is right here. It's like my physical body is made out of atoms. How can I separate my physical body from atoms? Well, how can I separate myself from the spiritual realm? I'm out of the spiritual realm. Everything is out of the spiritual realm. So the first shift I went through was to stop seeing the distance and start seeing that the I Am presence is all around me. It's really all around me and is here with me. But that meant I also had to give up this idea that I can hide anything from the presence. I mean, this is another old idea, and it's again this. Why do people want to have the remote God in the sky? Because they can hide from him, or they think they can, which of course is a ridiculous idea, but many people believe it. God is up there, and he's not really looking, you know. I can hide something. I can get away with things, and then in the end, I give some rosaries, light some candles, call to Jesus, and then I'll be saved. without having changed my consciousness. It's this whole dysfunctional, I've talked about in several of my videos, the outer path, where we think that by doing some outer ritual, whether it's giving violet flame or lighting candles, we can qualify for entry into heaven without having to look at the beam in our own eye and change our consciousness. So there comes this higher level of the path where you have to shift your sense of identity. You are not identified as a human being here on earth, and your I Am Presence is up there. You start overcoming that human identity, and this is letting go of one separate self at a time, until you shift and you can accept that you are the I Am Presence. You are at least an extension of it. You're not the fullness, the conscious you is not the fullness of the I Am Presence, but it is out of the I Am Presence. It's like a wave on the ocean. How do you separate a wave from the ocean? You can't, right? But what you can do is you can, instead of being focused on the top of the wave, the crest of the wave, you can allow your mind to sink down into the ocean. The wave of your sense of identity, your thoughts, your feelings, they're sinking down into the ocean until you experience the ocean. That's when you can start experiencing the presence at a higher level. And you can say it's a state of being instead of doing. You can say that you're experiencing presence. You're experiencing the present moment without having any idea of what should have happened in the past or what shouldn't have happened in the future. You're just experiencing the presence. You're experiencing your own presence, your own being. There are many ways to describe it. There are many teachings about it. Even some of these modern teachers, Eckhart Tolle has talked a lot about it, and other teachers that talk about this. Course in Miracles talks about it. So there are a number of teachings that are not openly Ascended Master teachings that talk about this shift. So what am I saying here? I'm saying is this is the next stage, instead of seeing yourself as connected. And I've seen people, and I did it for myself my time. It's like you're standing there, you have connected to the phone. You know your I Am Presence is up there and it can hear you. But now you feel it's withdrawing from you, you're not feeling connection anymore. So you just think you have to yell louder and it'll hear you. And you can keep doing this indefinitely, giving more and more decrees, doing this, being frantic about it, like some people do. But there comes a point you just have to give it up. You just have to surrender it. You just have to let it go. And instead of trying to connect, you're seeking to just be, to experience the presence. And that's when you can experience, as I've also described in many of my videos, that the conscious you is pure awareness. In a sense, when you experience pure awareness, you're in a way experiencing the conscious you. But, you're in a way experiencing the I Am Presence. But the conscious you is experiencing the I Am Presence. But when you experience pure awareness, you're not really experiencing the individuality of the presence. And that's sort of the next step. But here's the deal. Your conscious you has, over many lifetimes on earth, developed this outer individuality, outer personality. And this is what you shift away from. You're not identified with this. But your I Am Presence has also, in all the time the conscious you has been in embodiment, also developed its individuality. It's just not based on duality or reaction to the world. So when you begin to become more one with the I Am Presence, you are beginning, you can't really say you're connecting to the individuality of the presence, but you can begin to experience it. The thing is, how are you going to experience the individuality of your I Am Presence? Not over a distance. It's not in the mind. You see, what was it that happened when you first found the spiritual path and heard about the I Am Presence? Your mind created a concept, an idea of what the presence is like. And you projected this idea. I mean, we couldn't do anything else. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. We came from a certain background, the remote being in the sky and all this stuff. So we projected these mental images on the presence. We can't do anything else. It's perfectly natural, unavoidable. But you cannot become one with a concept. Because a concept is the subject-object duality. I am a subject, and there's a remote object that I'm studying. So, the subject, however I see myself right now, I'm studying this remote object, the I am presence. And one day I'll know what the individuality of the presence is, and then I'll be able to, with the outer mind, start expressing it in the world. But that's not how it works. The only way you're going to know the individuality of your I am presence is by overcoming the subject-object duality. Your I am presence is not an object you're studying. You're not seeking to discover the individuality of the I am presence so you know how to behave or what choices to make in the world. You have to surrender the sense of distance, the sense of identification with the outer mind, even with the conceptual mind. You have to surrender any concept you have of the presence. So you're not relating it. You see what I'm saying? The conceptual mind, it's like, you are here. This is the conscious you. I'm here. This is my conscious you. The world is out there. But in between is this, what I call the perception filter of all these separate selves. Like a screen that colors and distorts the way I look at the world. And it's the same thing. The I am presence is there. I am here. And here's my perception, my concept of the I am presence. So I'm relating to everything through this concept. I'm relating to my I am presence through this filter. And you have to give up the filter. It's not a matter of overcoming it, destroying it. It's a matter of letting it go, coming to see that it's illusion. Surrender. It's almost like you're not going to force your I am presence to come down and help you. You can surrender. It's like I said with the wave. You surrender into the ocean. You sink into the ocean. How are you going to discover the individuality of your I am presence? When it is being expressed through you. You will not know ahead of time and then you decide to express it. No, you are deciding to surrender and then you are experiencing the individuality as it is expressing itself through you. I had a concept for many years that was very helpful to me to become an open door for the presence. An open door means a door with no filter, no perception filter. It's open. Whatever came from my presence, I would express it without evaluating with the outer mind whether this was appropriate or not. Just think for a moment. How many evaluations are going on in your mind constantly? Is this appropriate? What should I do in this situation? What can I say in this situation? Is this person open to something? Can I talk about my spiritual path? Can I really be myself here, or should I be whatever is required in this environment? All of a sudden, all of the time, there's this evaluation process going on. And that's what you have to gradually let go of one at a time until you can just experience and be the open door for the I am presence. And then even beyond this, there is this shift in identity where you're not really the open door anymore, because even the open door implies that the I am presence is up there and expressing itself through you into the world. But you have to overcome that last sense of distance where it's not even, and I mean, for me it was helpful for a time of saying, I am the presence. But it's really beyond this, it's more I am presence. And it's not a matter of saying it, of course, it's a matter of experiencing it. So it's a matter of, and here again, be careful here. Because I had the same tendency, I would get this idea. Usually the path is a process where we increase our understanding of something. So I got this idea, I am presence. So I'd go around saying this in my mind, I am presence, I am presence. But that's not really what it's about. It's a matter of experiencing it instead of saying it. Because that's again a certain distance, or it's the mind that's saying it. It's a matter of this surrender into the experience. You see what I'm saying? There is the concept we have in the mind and the experience, the direct experience. It's like I've said before. You can create all kinds of concepts of what an apple tastes like. But until you take a bite, you don't have the experience. And it's the same thing with the I am presence. And you will not get to oneness with the I am presence through concepts, only by letting them fall away. Many spiritual teachings talk about a veil. There is a veil that we have to penetrate. And really, it's a useful metaphor, but it's it's really a matter of realizing there is no veil because there never was any separation in the first place. You can't be separated from your I Am Presence. You can create the concept in the mind that you're separated from the I Am Presence and that you need to overcome that. But as long as you have the concept that you need to overcome a distance or separation, you're not there, you're not in the experience. And how do you overcome that? Not through the mind, but by coming to see that what the mind does is through these separate selves, through these perception filters that are projecting the distance. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. I have explained before, and this was extremely helpful for me to get this teaching from the Ascended Masters. So what I've said, or the Masters have said is, when we first came into embodiment on Earth, we started at the 48th level of consciousness out of 144. We had some sense of connection, didn't really know what we were connected to. And the spiritual path is about walking the steps up, 49s, 50s, 51s, so forth, where we increase our sense of connection. But what was it that really happened? What happened is that the conscious you, which is pure neutral awareness, doesn't have any outer personality, in order to take embodiment and get down to the 48th level, it has to start at the 144th level. And at that level, there's a certain illusion. You take on that illusion. You create a subconscious self, but it's not created out of duality. This is important to understand. When we go below the 48th level, we are creating dualistic selves that are based on the idea of separation. But the selves we take on down to the 48th level are not based on separation, based on duality. They are based on going into denser and denser levels. So we take on an illusion at the 144th level, another at the 143rd, and these relate to how the conscious you sees itself in relation to the world. And that's why we gradually go down until we become more and more identified with, first, the identity body that we are actually creating as we're taking on these illusions, then the mental body, and then the emotional body. And then when we have created these three higher bodies, we can slip into the to a physical body. And these illusions we take on, they're individual for each of us. In a sense, you could say there's a general illusion, but how we interpret it individually is up to us. So you could say, in a sense, that you will ultimately be free and ultimately be one with the I Am Presence when you reach the 144th level, or rather, when you at the 144th level give up the last illusion and ascend. That's when you will have total oneness with the I Am Presence. You merge back into the I Am Presence. So up until then, you will have some sense of, what should we call it? Distance, separateness. You will have some sense that I am down here, I am focused down here, and the I Am Presence is beyond this. Not necessarily up there, but still. You're still in a sort of, there is some kind of distance, separation, and there will be. But the higher you go beyond the 96th level, the more that distance becomes insignificant. And the way I think I could most easily describe this is to, when I look at myself, I'm not at the 144th level of consciousness. I'm not sure where I'm at because a while back it stopped mattering to me. But I still have some outer personality. I mean, you can see I'm talking a certain way. I have a certain way of looking at life. I have a certain sense of humor that some people don't like and some people think is okay. And these are just what we might call personality traits. And this is what I took on as my conscious you descended to from the 144th to these levels. It's even in my identity body, a certain way that I'm relating to Earth. But there came a point where I stopped identifying with it. I just realized, yes, it's just like, it's a cold day and you're putting on an overcoat. Because in order to go outside without freezing, you have to put on a coat. But it doesn't mean you become the code. You're not identified with it. You don't think you can't take it off. And you don't think it's the only thing you can wear. So as I have grown, I have stopped identifying with this, obviously first my emotions, then my thoughts, and then my sense of identity. And so I'm still expressing myself a certain way. I mean, what else could I do, and why should I even change it? What does it matter? You have a certain outer personality, so what? Otherwise, you go into this reactionary where you think you have to totally react to other people and give them what they want, and that means what? You can't be yourself ever. So, it just doesn't matter because you're not identified with it anymore. And that also means that as I have let go of that sense of identification, I'm just more open to my own presence expressing itself through me. But I don't really think about it anymore, whether it's my own presence or myself. I mean, what's the difference? I have so many situations where I'm not looking at the situation with the outer mind and analyzing and evaluating. I remember many years ago I was into these positive mental attitude, and you should make a list, of the positive aspects of doing something and the negative aspects of doing it, and then evaluate the two. I don't do that anymore at all. I become much more spontaneous. And I used to be not very spontaneous. I used to be very much thinking in the mind. When I first found the spiritual path, I would think and evaluate everything. But now I become much more spontaneous, and suddenly I get an impulse, yeah, I'll do this. And I'll do it. And, that's where I think we can all come to. And then the other thing is, after I've done something, I don't go into this analyzing. I used to do this more, when I was younger. I could have these situations where for example, I felt I did something stupid, so I was embarrassed. And I would analyze, and I would go over the situation again and again and again, and why did this happen, and why did I do this, and why didn't I see this? And now I'm much more, well, it happened, so it happened, and maybe I look at it and say, is there something I need to learn from it? And I'm open to, is this a separate self, that causes me to react a certain way? But then I look at the separate self, I dissolve it, and I move on. It's not like what I used to do, is all this analyzing. So I would analyze before, and I would analyze after. And now there's really no before and after. I'm just acting, and it is what it is, The cookie crumbled. This is the physical octave. I'm not attached to outer result anymore, because I realize that we are in this very difficult environment, as the Buddha said, the interdependent originations. And when you do something, the outcome can't really be controlled. It's dependent on so many factors. So it's just like that's how the cookie crumbled. And then you just move on, to something else. You do something else. Wait for the next impulse, And so, I don't know, I probably could go on with this, but I think what I've said so far hopefully will help people start the process. Because really, I don't think you can explain this to people, at least not all of it, because it has to come from within. It's a gradual process, shifting your sense of identity, experiencing the presence without going through these concepts in the mind. Just having these experiences and gradually coming to accept, I am presence.